Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Cavan-Smith. Tonight, around 800,000 people have been forced from their homes in southern Ethiopia since April. The report blames inter-ethnic violence for the mass displacements. Also, Macron shakes his moneymaker. The French president continues his visit to Nigeria. It's about building business ties and boosting security, but he also gets time to loosen his tie and get down on the dance floor for a soiree at the shrine. And as hundreds of female business leaders from Africa's private sector meet in Paris for a huge networking event, we're joined by one of the participants, a Zimbabwean managing director of a tech solution company, to discuss the achievements, issues and aspirations of African female management. But first, ethnic clashes in southern Ethiopia have forced more than 800,000 people from their homes in just a few months. A report by the Ethiopian government and the UN has warned that violence that erupted along the border regions of Gedeo and West Guji in April has caused mass displacement. Investigators haven't yet given a number for casualties, but last month, diplomats did estimate that hundreds may have been killed. The unrest is one of several ethnic conflicts fueled by land grievances in the country that are still ongoing. Tom Gardner tells us more about the cause of the fighting.
As is always the case in Ethiopia, when ethnic violence of this kind occurs, it's extremely difficult to pinpoint causes and apportion blame, not least because the areas affected are very difficult to access. In this instance, we have a long contested border between two regions, Oromia and the Southern Nations Nationalities and Peoples region, SNNPR, and one of the most densely populated parts of the country. So I think it's safe to say this is about land and competition over land and about ethnicity and importantly, the way the Ethiopian federal constitution divides the country up into ethnic blocks and inadvertently incentivizes competition between ethnic groups over land and resources. And it also makes it politically advantageous for local elites and regional officials to encourage ethnic violence. And this has happened time and again since the current constitution was introduced in 1994. And it seems to be what's happened here.
So it's a very complex landscape, but is it linked directly to those 3 years of protests in Oromia that we saw lead to the resignation of the former Prime Minister?
Well, I mean, these tensions, as they do throughout the country, predate the protests. But I do think there is a link. The protests that brought the new Prime Minister to power had many dimensions, including opposition to authoritarianism, but they were certainly about ethnic identities as well, in particular the perceived marginalization of the Oromo ethnic group, which the new Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, comes from. And unfortunately, there was always a darker underbelly to this ethnic assertiveness, and I think that's on full display here in this particular incident. You have ethnic Gedeos from the southern region overwhelmingly being displaced by Oromos from Guji. But it's important to remember that this sort of violence is happening all over the country right now. It's not confined to this region, and there's never a single perpetrator.
Tom Gardner there for us. Now, France's president spent a second day in Nigeria on Wednesday. Emmanuel Macron inaugurated the Alliance Française Cultural Centre in Lagos and met with business leaders and young entrepreneurs as he continued his trip aimed at forging closer ties with the country. The busy day, though, came after an equally busy night, during which Macron took to the dance floor to celebrate Nigerian culture.
It's the first time a French president has visited Lagos, the biggest city in Africa's most populous country. On the second day of his visit to Nigeria, Emmanuel Macron met 300 young entrepreneurs and inaugurated the French Cultural Centre in the megacity. Nigeria is surrounded by French-speaking nations. Macron also launched the organisation of the 2020 season of African cultures in France. He discussed the event during an interview broadcast on RFI and France 24.
The idea is to change the way France sees Africa. It must not be seen as a continent that threatens us because of migrants or terrorists. It is a land which has an incredible vitality, culture, political message, and its own vision.
By coming to Nigeria, Macron wants to show he's not only interested in French-speaking African countries like many of his predecessors. He says France-Afrique, the murky relationship between Paris and its former colonies, is over.
The main principle of my policies regarding African governments is to help them, but never to decide on their behalf. Sometimes we speak frankly about what we think was done in a good way or bad way. France supports governments when it believes good decisions have been taken, and therefore you must also read between the lines when I'm silent.
In a bid to appear young and dynamic, Macron also went to the Shrine, the nightclub of Nigerian legend Fela Kuti. But this visit was not only about cultural ties. Nigeria is a major economic partner for France. It represents, for example, more than 10% of the oil production of French company Total.
In Kenya, an arrest warrant's been issued for the owners of the dam, the collapse of which killed 47 people in May. The banks of Milmet Dam, near the town of Solai, burst and homes in 2 villages were swept away after weeks of heavy rains. In Ivory Coast, a law preventing the import of any cars older than 5 years came into effect at the start of the month. The second-hand car market is a huge industry that sees more than 50,000 used vehicles being imported every year. Around 86% already in the country are thought to be more than 16 years old. So the industry is up in arms over the change.
Heavy traffic amid billows of smoke is part and parcel of daily life in Abidjan. Most cars have already been driven in Europe, often for more than a decade. But since the 1st of July, the import of vehicles over 5 years is prohibited.
All these vehicles that you see here, vehicles that are more than 5 years old, but perfectly okay and in good condition. There are 12-year-old vehicles, 13-year-old, 17-year-old, 16-year-old ones.
The new law only applies to cars that are yet to be shipped, but it could already have an adverse effect on prices of current stock.
The cheapest is 3 million. That's what we have on the market right now. The cheapest and imported coming from Europe. But with our new calculations, the price of these vehicles may double.
Approximately 14,000 jobs are at stake. Abdoulaye Ouattara has a fleet of 10 taxis, a common mode of transport for Ivorians living in cities.
With a vehicle that's so expensive, we'll have to demand more money from our drivers, who in turn will have to increase their prices.
Government, however, claims to have the support of the majority of the sector and believes it is moving in the right direction.
We need to move forwards and have new low-cost vehicles assembled in Ivory Coast. Conditions must be created, new jobs must be created. Then there is the reality with regards to air pollution, which is a reality that we all live with here in Abidjan.
The minister has promised to look at accompanying measures to control the cost of buying used cars and preserve jobs in the sector.
Now, hundreds of business leaders from across Africa were in Paris this week for the Women in Business Leadership meeting. The gathering wrapped up on Wednesday night and has been held annually for 3 years now. It's a chance for networking and discussion of the achievements of and issues affecting women at the forefront of industries operating on the continent. Now, Nothando Napata is a tech specialist from Zimbabwe. She's also the managing director of Devoted Business Solutions, which deals with IT for small and medium-sized enterprises. She told me more about some of the main issues that crop up at events like this.
I think this was a very crucial time, and I'm so grateful that Jeune Afrique managed to put this platform together for African women leaders. You'll find that key things that we really don't have access to as women is an ability to network, just an opportunity to be able to sit in a room and meet another woman who's obviously walked the miles and tell you the wisdom that they have and the experience they have. So that's one key thing that we have, is just an opportunity and a platform to network. Number two is to hear experiences from someone who obviously looks like you and has gone through tremendous challenges. Operating on the African continent is not, I would say maybe not necessarily as easy as it is in Western countries, because also as a woman, there's just definitely barriers to entry in certain markets, especially like for ourselves in technology, let alone when you're a woman who's actually leading such an enterprise. So it was absolutely awesome to be able to sit with women who actually have experienced this, who have transcended some of these difficulties and are able to now showcase to you and tell you exactly how it is and how you can maneuver your way around some obstacles that are common amongst us as women. The third thing as well.
I'm just going to stop you there, though, because you've mentioned the barriers and the obstacles. What are we talking about? What are these barriers? What are these obstacles that you face?
Okay. So, well, the first thing is you get the standard, it's a man's world. So a lot of men have been networked. So it's not so much that it's an anti-woman environment, but it's because women come in with a very different flair. So they were never part of the network. We were never part of the club in the first place. So you have to obviously now work your way into this club, which has certain gentlemen. So you want to be able to say, okay, now I'm here. What then happens next? There's things like if you are actually an owner-managed business and you're a woman, there's how then do you get the bank to take you as seriously as they take your male counterpart who's got the same business proposal as you do? How then do you carry yourself forward? So you find that a lot of the times you're having to work a lot more harder than maybe your male counterpart to be able to get a certain proposal approved. How basically you're able to walk into an opportunity and a customer opportunity and be able to pass it and get and win an opportunity for your business without having to sell yourself or things of that nature. How best you get the world to take you seriously. If you're actually in a corporate environment, for example, and this is not owner managed, the issues come down to you're a woman and you have other roles as well that you have to fulfill as a woman. How then are you able to make up for that time that maybe you do maternity leave and things like that and still be able to be taken seriously and get the next promotion, which, your male counterpart doesn't have that time off that you do. So you tend to have that lag behind. How do you cover up for that time? Those are the sort of conversations that we had, is what then happens. There's now issues where there's certain quotas that are now put that maybe force certain organizations to put certain women. But you don't want to be just part of a quota. You want to be able to succeed and, succeed on merit, not just on, just having made it by a quota. So what does that actually mean in terms of success? Then how then do you balance it out? Because you're a woman who's in leadership, but you also have roles and responsibilities which are very important that you contribute to from a society perspective. You're a mother, you're a wife, you have a home to take care of. How then do you actually, is it even possible to get it all, to make it all? Those were some of the things that we had an opportunity to discuss, which was very, very important. Then the next key thing is, okay, I succeeded. Like in my example, for example, I'm now an executive. There's issues to do with boards. You want to be able to effect meaningful change and have more platforms to speak and bear impact in other organizations.
Nothando Napata there speaking to me a little earlier on. Well, that's it for Eye in Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again.
Revisited, presented by Stuart Norval.
The election of Adama Barrow in 2016 filled Gambians with hope. After 22 years of autocratic rule, Yahya Jammeh was beaten in the elections. His expulsion from the country drew a curtain on a past stained by imprisonment, murder and corruption. But will the new Gambia promised by the president live up to expectations?
Revisited on France 24 and France24.com.